going backwards and forwards. Just in the same way in your businesses, you will come up with a new political policy. There'll be a lot of heated debate behind that, and people will say things.
Relevant question to ask: what has Facebook got to hide?
Well, I think my answer is, I don't think that we have a duty to put into the public domain all of our internal discussions around an issue. I think it is appropriate for us to respond on how we settle that issue, the decision we came to. But no, I don't think it's reasonable that we should share, any more than you should, internal discussions that can be quite robust.
So you've got nothing to hide?
In terms of what we did, no. In terms of, are we comfortable airing all of those internal conversations, all of the robust comments that people may have made in those conversations, and have those treated as the company's official position? I don't think that's fair.
What I have read is a summary document that's been circulated, which is public information because it's been filed in court, and that refers to the background to the FTC order, consent order in 2012. To what extent has Facebook complied with that order?
We believe that we have complied with it. There's been a whole series of actions that we had to take, but I think, as you may be aware, the FTC have indicated that they want to have another look on the back of the same issues that we've been talking about here.
So, but you, as far as you're concerned, you fully complied with it?
As far as I'm concerned, we believe we fully comply with it.
Okay. I mean, from the summary I've read, and you may call this partial from you called it hostile litigants, but the allegations against Facebook go beyond tough and sharp business practice to maximise revenues, cherry-pick purchases, Anaro, WhatsApp, Instagram, beyond interstellar data gathering, but really extend to crushing competition. And at every point in this summary, I wrote down 3 letters in the margin, 4 letters actually, RICO, which you'll be aware of, the Racketeer, Influence and Corrupt Organisations Act. Is that a fair thought to have in my mind?
I mean, not at all. I mean, there are 2 ways you can characterise our company, and the litigant is clearly characterising it one way, and you've reacted similarly. The other way to characterise our company is a group of people who I have worked with closely over many years who want to build a successful business. They want the business to do good in the world. At the same time, they want it to be successful and grow. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally conspiratorial about that. They make the same kind of decisions any business would make in order to be successful in what is a highly competitive space. You know the internet space.
I didn't use the word conspiratorial. I was just going to use the word conspiracy because RICO it covers that. Conspiracy to damage someone's business or property.
Yeah.
Has anyone approached Facebook, to your knowledge, about filing a RICO suit against?
Not that I'm aware.
Has Facebook ever prepared the ground and taken advice on how it would defend a RICO lawsuit?
Not that I'm aware.
Perhaps if it has, you could let us know. Can I just follow up with one final set of questions? The mainstream network.
Yes.
You must have seen the evidence that was given to us about ads being run by the anonymous mainstream network. I've just tried to see whether they've got any ads running now, and it doesn't appear that they have.
Yeah.
So what have you done?
So again, for those who are not so close to it, this is an entity that created a page on Facebook and ran ads described as chuck checkers, which in our British parlance means reject the Prime Minister's Brexit deal. As soon as there was press attention on that organisation, precisely because it is now transparent where the ads are being sourced from, they stopped running ads. Our understanding, and unless anyone wants to correct me here, is that there is nothing today illegal in the United Kingdom about an organisation running those kind of ads. It'd be very interesting, and I know the committee's recommendations touch on this to understand whether or not that should change in the future. As of this week, any organisation that wants to run ads like that will have to authorise. We will collect their identifying information. They'll have to put on an accurate disclaimer. Their ads will go in the archive. But the deterrent effect seems to be working in that this organisation, once there was press attention and once we brought the new tools in, have stopped their advertising activity.
So can I ask you, to have a page like that, what details do they have to file with you?
To set up a basic Facebook page, they don't. They need to have a valid Facebook account. If we believe it's a fake account, we'll shut it down and shut the page down. But if it's you and it's your legitimate Facebook account, I don't personally know who's behind it.
No, does Facebook know who's behind it?
We would know whose Facebook account it was, and if there were an investigation by an entity that legally can require information, we'd provide information in line with the normal
Okay, my final
procedures.
question, in the interest of transparency, because an election could happen at any time here in the UK. When you go away, could you tell us who is behind that account? And if you can't tell us, write to us and tell us why.
Yes, I'll write to you in either way. Thank you. Hildegard Dorton.
So earlier this year, we held a referendum on abortion in Ireland, and both Facebook and Google stopped all advertising in relation to that referendum. And that action was very much welcomed by the Irish government at the time. And so my question is that action not an admission by your platform that it is used for fake news, to decimate fake news, and to influence elections?
So that was a very specific response, and again, I was part of the decision-making process, and I'm glad that the ultimate decision, that you welcome that. What we saw was there's a very good non-governmental organisation, the Transparency Project, Transparency Referendum Initiative in Ireland, who were flagging to us sort of clear evidence that there were significant amounts of money being spent by organisations on both sides of that debate from people outside of Ireland. We then needed to make a decision. Irish law, as I understand it, is silent on the matter. It says that foreigners must not fund Irish political parties. It doesn't say anything about them spending their own money projecting stuff in. I assume reasonably, because when the law was written, there was no, it was local TV and radio, it was all controllable, and our systems didn't exist. Because of that silence, we needed to interpret what we thought the intent or spirit of Irish law was, and we took the decision that projecting material in from outside Ireland was something we would not allow. We're now very into the debate. I think C76, the new law proposal in Canada, I think has this explicit provision on preventing outside interference, and I think you have also legislation in front of you. So that's the rationale for the decision. We tried to understand what the spirit of Irish law was, having to make a pretty binary decision, yes, no. We're not comfortable. We would much rather that there is a legal framework that we can stick to where you've made those decisions. But
so the threat was there, and that's why I suppose, and I know you can't speak for Google, but it was Google and Facebook who made that decision during that election, that referendum campaign, to stop all advertising. Yeah. So would it be fair to say that there was a threat that there would be fake news decimated through your platform, and there would be interference in the electoral process?
And again, to tease that, for us, this was not a fake news question, so more as just a straightforward political campaigning.
There was potential for that.
It was election interference, as in somebody was spending money. But a lot of the ads were vote yes, vote no. They were not fake news as such. They were just straightforward, political.
But the concern was that there was political interference.
Yeah,
that's fine. And as I say, the Irish government very much welcomed that. You made reference there to legislation. We have 2 private members' bills going through the Irish Parliament at the moment, and both Facebook and Google have come before our committee, our Communications Committee in the Oireachtas in Ireland, and engaged constructively with our committee in relation to that. One is a private member's bill in relation to a Digital Safety Commissioner bill, which would provide a takedown power to a regulator. The second bill that we're looking at is Online Advertising Social Media Transparency Bill 2017, which would ensure that when you're viewing an ad that you would know who is paying for it. So in light of fake news and the data breaches that your company has been involved in over the last 2 years, do you accept that Facebook needs to be regulated?
So yes,
through legislation like this.
Yes, and I mean we very much welcome the updating of election law. Again, it's not to be critical that many of the laws governing political communication were drafted pre-internet. They have things like bans or restrictions on certain forms of campaigning, but they're behind the times. We've seen some very interesting developments. Brazil, for example, I understand that the responsibility is put on the political actor. That they can only use a service if it has the transparency tools, and if they don't do that, then the political actor is in trouble. Canada, I understand, is doing something similar around disclaimers, but also putting responsibility on the platform. To the extent that again, you set the rules for your elections, it's not us, but to the extent that this is all clarified and we have a simple playbook to work to, that would be extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah. And I suppose, and thank you for that. So the root of this is, and this is our concern, is that there is a lack of regulation of social media right across the board, and it's not just Facebook, just to put that on the record. We have our colleagues not here today, but Australia have their own Digital Safety Commissioner, and my understanding is that process is working very well because of the engagement with social media platforms, and I think I'm correct in saying that the Digital Safety Commissioner in Australia has not needed to actually fine social media platforms because of the engagement process. And I think for people listening and watching and citizens across the world who we all represent want to hear, I suppose, Facebook's view in relation to regulation. Are you serious about regulation on a global level? Because we're all here representing international countries right across the globe, and that we need to regulate on a global level. Yeah. And what is your view on that?
Absolutely. So again, to be very clear, my view is that the best outcome that we get for people, our users, your constituents, they're the same people. The best outcome that we get is where we are working together on this. I have now tens of thousands of colleagues who are deeply committed to trying to protect the safety of our users. Again, these are people who get up every morning and worry about what's happening on the platform and try and prevent harm. And it's now tens of thousands. It used to be too few, and we accept that. The best way that we can ensure safety is where we're able to be very open with government about the problems we're seeing and have a very informed debate, and where we can work together on what the solutions are. Some of the solutions are on our platform. We can throw people off. We can collect information. There's certain things we can do. Some of them absolutely need regulation. If somebody is a threat to children, us throwing them off Facebook is not enough. They'll go somewhere else. And we need them to work with the authorities to prosecute them. So the UK government has, I think, an intended white paper in next year that we'll work with them on. As you said, we're working with you and with other governments. That's the team I run, sort of does a lot of this work. We've recently announced we're going to work with the French government, again, and bring regulators in and try and develop new regulatory models. Where, as I say, ideally, we get experts in areas like child safety, we get experts in technology like us, and we get experts in the law and people who represent the users from the political world working together. That's where we think we'll get the best outcomes.
I think anywhere you have it's human nature, where there is no regulation, no oversight, no watchdog, be it in business, an organisation, you need to have that oversight. Would you agree in the case of Facebook and other social media platforms that you also need that regulation on a global level?
Absolutely, and that's our expectation, that we should be accountable for you. We should tell you what we've done. And if you're unhappy, you should have the power to take sanctions against us. I completely accept that principle. Yeah,
because we have agreed here to maybe look at consulting how we would set out a set of rules on an international level, be it through the United Nations or at an OECD level. And I think that would be very positive. And I hope that we could continue this work, Chair. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you both, both Canada and the UK, for coming together to co-chair this meeting. And I think this is the start of a very important process that I think we can all work together to ensure that there's momentum now that we regulate social media and work together on that.
Thank you. Perfect segue to Nathan Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. So the chair beside you is noticeably empty. So I want to start with a statement from Mark Zuckerberg. He says, "We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility. It was my mistake, and I'm sorry." Do you agree with that statement? And you think Mark Zuckerberg was genuine in making it?
Yes.
So just not sorry enough to appear himself before 9 parliaments. Taking a broader view of responsibility, does that include the failure to sufficiently prevent election interference, including in 2016? If you were to take a broader view of responsibility, it would have been taking more steps to prevent election interference. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. The failure to sufficiently prevent the spread of hate, including in the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar. If you were to take a broader review of responsibility, Facebook would have been taking greater action to prevent hateful content on its platform. Is that fair?
Yes, and I think we've acknowledged these issues publicly.
So the failure to prevent the creation and approval of problematic targeting audiences. So, for example, 168,000 people under the category white genocide conspiracy theory. If you were to take a broader view of responsibility, you would prevent the creation of such audiences. Is that fair?
Yes, and we do today.
Okay, so was Facebook malicious in any of this conduct?
And again, that's not my experience. The people I work with are sincere. about building a service that they believe offers value to people, and we believe in the most cases we do that. We've recognized that we're doing something new. Yeah. We hit new problems.
So the failure to take that broader view of responsibility wasn't malicious, is my point. Right. It was negligent.
Again, there were things that we missed, that we were either not sufficiently focused on or too slow to react to. And I think, again, on the examples you've cited, we've said that. Sure. Take the specific example of the Rohingya and the situation in Myanmar. We should have hired more Burmese speakers to review Burmese language content earlier. We've now done that.
It sounds like you would agree it's not malicious and it's negligent. So I want to briefly touch on reciprocity. It's new information for me, but I reviewed it recently. Did Facebook ever make the purchase of mobile ads a condition for developers' continued access to friend data?
No.
Okay. Did Facebook treat developers' APIs differently if they purchased mobile ad product?
I'm not aware of that. Again, that's a very specific question that I would need to look into.
Would Mark Zuckerberg have an answer to that question?
I'm not sure he would. I'm not sure anyone would. I need to understand the very specific question you made.
I think he would.
You probably should answer that question to this committee at a future date. Perhaps Mark Zuckerberg could. Did Facebook ever tell app developers they needed to start buying Facebook's mobile ad products on there, or their access to friend data would be cut off?
And again, I take a step back. You're quoting, I know, from the emails that have been circulated.
I'm not.
Or you're discussing information that was shared within those emails.
I'm not.
There's been no disclosure, but just to be really clear for the record, there's been no disclosure outside of the DCMS committee to any of the information contained in the emails.
So I'll again ask, did Facebook ever tell app developers they needed to start buying Facebook's mobile ad products, or their access to friend data would be cut off?
No.
Okay. Did Mark Zuckerberg ever cancel an announcement to implement API restrictions, including friend data being publicly removed? Did he ever cancel an announcement to implement API restrictions, including friend data being publicly removed? Is that something that Mark Zuckerberg ever did?
I am not aware. I would need to check.
Mark Zuckerberg would
the
have an
announcement
answer to that
of a
question,
cancellation of a development. And do you have a time frame?
Well, it would have been presumably before 2014, I would expect. But
2014.
I don't know that answer. You don't know that answer. Mark Zuckerberg would know that answer.
Not if it was before 2014. I think he, like me, would have to check.
So I want to get to Canadian context. So the Office of the Privacy Commissioner in 2009 was part of an investigation and a settlement, and they flagged for Facebook this question of unrestricted sharing of friend data with app developers. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay, and so in 2009 it was flagged as an issue, but it wasn't until 2014 that it was addressed. Why the 5-year gap?
And again, I hope I was clear in response to an earlier question that our understanding was that this was not illegal.
Okay, great. I'm glad you said that, because the Canadian law requires meaningful consent. So is it your view that, we don't know each other, but let's assume we're friends on Facebook, Mr. Allen, and so is it your view that you agreeing to use an application, and the fact that I have failed to go into my privacy settings and check a box that I have given meaningful consent to Facebook to allow you to share that information? That's your view of the law? You think that is meaningful consent?
Yes, and again, just to clarify, when you signed up for Facebook,
in Canada.
Again, just be clear, these issues are being contested, and they were contested then, they'll be contested now. Yeah. Our view is that when you signed up for Facebook, we were sufficiently clear that part of the package of signing up for Facebook was it's a social experience. The clue is in the title, social network. Yeah. As part of the social experience, when you share information with your friends may share it on. Remember that. As soon as I've shared a photo with you, we are friends now, sure. You can take that photo and do what you like with it.
And why would I object to your using Farmville and all my information being shared with the Farmville app developer?
And again, it's not...
Why would I object to that? Okay, so...
Not all information.
Let's talk Cambridge Analytica, because in the Canadian context, 270 people use the This Is Your Digital Life app, okay?
270,000?
No, 270 people.
In Canada?
In Canada.
Right.
And 620,000 people had their information shared with that developer. Is that acceptable to you?
And again, so the sharing on, the use of that data was wrong. A benign application, like the one I've described, where I sign up for the application and I pull in all of my friends' birthdays into my birthday calendar, that would be okay.
So
that was the intended use case.
Okay, but every app developer, it wasn't this specific birthday app, this specific calendar app. It was every application. It was a rudimentary application to make a cow jump. It was a Farmville application. It was Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah.
I mean, The idea that you can point to a calendar app and say, therefore, we share all information with every app developer, how is that acceptable?
And again, I want to just...
So all friend data with every app developer,
and again,
how is that acceptable?
Not all data. So to be very clear...
I said all friend data.
And again, not all data of all friends. So applications needed to ask for permissions.
Right.
We asked them, and you can argue this was not sufficiently well enforced, and we can have that discussion, but we said very clearly in our terms, if you're an app that's running a birthday calendar, you can ask for birthdays. You can't ask for photos and all this irrelevant material if that's not the intent of your app. Now, GSR went outside
this
of that
has been
framework.
a tough time at Facebook. While these are hard problems, we are working hard to ensure that people find our products useful and that we are protecting our community from bad actors. That's a recent statement from Facebook. Has it occurred to you that in relation to privacy, Facebook might be becoming one of these bad actors?
I don't believe we are.
Okay. With respect to accountability and legal liability, you've supported the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. Should Facebook be accountable for all illegal content that is produced on their platform and not taken down within a reasonable period of time?
Again, I don't think that the internet will be well served by removing all intermediary liability protections, but I do accept, and you saw with the SESTA bill, that there are that the idea that we're exempt from everything is also, I think, out of date. So we need to get to the right balance, back to Ms. Norton's question on where our responsibilities
lie. The last
lie.
thing I will say is this, okay? So, and it gets to this idea of trust, okay? So we don't have Mr. Zuckerberg here today, which is incredibly unfortunate. I think speaks to a failure to account for the loss of trust in certainly across the globe with respect to Facebook and Facebook's users. I mean, in the Canadian context, it wasn't until recently that you started to notify Canadian users that their information was shared with in the Cambridge Analytica context. And that sense of corporate social responsibility, particularly in light of the immense power and profit of Facebook, has been as empty as the chair beside you. Thanks very much, Mr. Allen.
Thank you. Rebecca Powell.
Thanks very much. You are welcome to our committee, Lord Allen. I just wanted to make, there's some quite general points that refer to many of the points being picked up. And one of them was that there's been a recent article in the New York Times which said that Facebook ignored warning signs and sought to conceal from public view many of the allegations that Facebook had power to exploit and disrupt elections, had broadcast propaganda, and to inspire hate campaigns. I wondered, what was your view about that? Do you agree with those allegations?
No,
They're quite outspoken.
Yeah, I mean, my own view is I thought the article, which obviously I read, mischaracterized discussions that and people that I've engaged with over the last few years. We are careful about when we release public information. We try and understand how it's going to land, and in particular in the context of some of the issues that they referred to in that article, there's no point in publishing a piece of security information if everyone's going to allege that it's partisan and dismiss it. And so we do have robust internal discussions about the release of information, but actually I think we're kind of ahead of the game in terms of the amount of information that Facebook publishes. I think is actually significant compared with what you know about what's going on the internet generally.
So the fact that personal data from 87 million people was harvested and then potentially used in the Trump campaign, you're saying you didn't act on that, you didn't react, you think none of that is relevant?
No, and we have acted on it. So there were the original set of accusations, which I say we discussed earlier, were reported in The Guardian, whether actually the Ted Cruz campaign, I believe it was, had contracted with Cambridge Analytica, who had contracted with this company, GSR. So that was the original set of allegations. It was in the public domain. We took steps, as we've explained to this committee, to try and ensure that any data that had been obtained had been destroyed. We received those assurances. I understand people are not satisfied with the fact that we only got written assurances, but we thought we had done the right thing around that incident.
I know that members of the public, when they're watching and listening to this very complicated saga that is ensuing, would be forgiven to the thinking that Facebook's main aim was really all about expanding their business and the value of their shares, and that potentially that has been put above public safety.
Again, I would contest that characterization. I don't want to hide the fact we are a business. We offer an amazing service to millions of people around the world, which we're able to do for free because we have this ad-funded model. But we're doing that, with a mission. We have a purpose. We want our service to be good. We want it to be useful. We want it to be safe. As we've discussed, I think, repeatedly today, we don't always get that right, but our objectives are very clear. We want a service that is useful and engaging and that lots of people want to take up.
I was interested
and we want it to be
hear
successful.
you say, Lord Allen, earlier that you said it was a win-win-win all around for everybody. But I put it to you, lots of people might think now, hearing all of the evidence that's coming out, that in many cases it's been a lose-lose-lose.
And again, I wouldn't characterize it that way. We are talking about some very specific, very important things that have gone wrong. And I think that's right. We're not focused, because it's not so interesting for the purposes of this hearing, on the things that go right. And the things that go right are millions of people connecting with you as politicians, with small businesses in their area, with brands that they love, with content that they love. They do that every day, day in, day out. And I think the value is there. I think the win-win-win is largely there. There are some specific issues we need to deal with. Some we need to deal with ourselves. Some will require regulation.
It's a great pity that Mr. Zuckerberg didn't turn up, but on that sort of note that you're making there, Mr. Zuckerberg, I believe, in a video conference to all his staff recently, said that much of the criticism of Facebook over the last 18 months relating to election security, content moderation and disinformation had in fact been fair and important.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So do you think he sounds quite confused, because in the next part of an article in the Times he said that a lot of the criticism had been unfair and untrue?
So the criticism of individuals, so again, to separate that out, there are things that we need to address, and quite rightly we're having conversations like this, many other conversations around the world around the specific issues we need to address, and we're building our defences against election interference. We're working on issues like false news, which we've managed to dramatically reduce. So at the same time as working on those issues, we are, I think, seeing some quite personal attacks on the staff who work at the company, which we don't recognise. I work with these people. I don't recognise the mischaracterisation of the individuals I work with, who I don't believe are involved in some vast conspiracy, but are actually decent people like yourselves trying to do a decent job.
And is there a feeling amongst Facebook and the staff that trust in Facebook has plummeted?
Absolutely. It's a major concern, a major topic of conversation. We recognise, both through our own actions and external events, that we're not in a good place in terms of trust.
And the Information Commission came out with a fine for Facebook, because they had deep concerns about what's going on there, and saying that you put the UK members at risk, and you had not done enough to address all of these allegations. But now I believe Facebook is challenging this fine. On what grounds are you challenging that?
So again, what we're challenging is the judgment, and it is helpful. Again, I think you have a session later to explain the rationale. We've tried to do that in public. It is not the amount of the fine that is the issue here. The issue is that there is language in the judgment that goes to the heart of the thing we've been discussing, which is how do you assign responsibility between the first party and the third party when you have one of these developer relationships, that we think is very important to test, not just for us actually, but for the whole sector. The appeal is the route, and the Information Commission herself has said it's an appropriate route for us to have that legal question looked at in some detail. And again, just to understand the concerns, some of the language in there suggests that if I have an email or a message that's been sent to me by somebody and I share it with a third party, that may be illegal and cause problems back to the first party. That's the kind of question I think is really important that we get right, because it will affect the entire ecosystem of internet applications.
So just to finish, Mr. Chairman, to the point that my Irish colleague made there, you said that you were pleased that we're having an open discussion about regulation. Are you really pleased, or does that appeal not demonstrate you're actually trying to get out of your responsibilities?
No. Again, just to be very precise, I am pleased personally, and the company is very much engaged all the way up to our CEO, and say he's spoken about this in public on the idea of getting the right kind of regulation, so that we can stop being in this confrontational mode. Frankly, it doesn't serve us or our users well. So let's try and get to the right place where you agree that we're doing a good enough job and you have powers to hold us to account if we're not, and we understand what the job is that we need to do. So that's on the regulation piece.
Okay, we can all hope. A quick question from Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Chair. Right at the start of this session, my colleague from Canada, Mr Angus, expressed our collective disappointment that Mr Zuckerberg chose not to appear before this committee. Were you were sent in his stead. Were you sent because in the whole of the Facebook empire, you were believed the person best placed to answer this committee's questions, or were you sent as the person best placed to defend the company's position?
I believe I'm here because I have been at Facebook since the year 2009. Most of the issues that you want to address are issues that I have first-hand knowledge of, and therefore I can add to your question.
So we haven't answered the question. So were you sent because you, in the entire Facebook empire, are the person best placed to answer all of these questions, or were you sent because you're best placed to defend the company?
I'm sent because I can answer your questions. We tried, and as you'll remember, we sent Mike Schroepfer, our Chief Technical Officer.
Yes, I remember that well.
He spent 5 hours here. We thought he had the information you needed. You were not happy. Issues related to elections, election interference are things that I
Can I ask them, who decided that you were the best placed person in the whole of Facebook to come before this international committee?
I volunteered myself.
So you volunteered. So Facebook never sat down and said, this is a hugely important multinational representing hundreds of millions of people. Who is best placed to go and explain our position? Nobody did that. You put your hand up and said, I will do it.
No, we had that discussion, and the discussion was, we've sent Mike Schroepfer. That they were not happy with Mike Schroepfer. Who else is in the best position to explain what it is that we do, particularly in relation to elections? That's the subject that we expect to be covered here. I said, I believe I have the knowledge that this group needs.
Let me press you on this. So when you, I presume, Facebook sat and looked at the transcript of the Mike Schroepfer interview session, and also the session we had in Washington, and looking at the transcript and looking at the number of times where Mike Schroepfer said, I'm sorry, I'll have to write to you on that, they thought, well, you would be the best person to come and clear up all of those unanswered questions.
So again, to be precise, both for the issues that you want to raise the UK committee, but also I now work on election issues globally. So we looked at the range of different parliaments that are coming here. I have been following the fake news law in Singapore. I've been following C-76 in Canada. I've been following the lawless legislation in Ireland. This is the stuff I work on. Our working assumption was that's what you'd want to discuss.
Okay, so having read the transcripts of all of the previous sessions we've had with Facebook, you volunteered to come here. And having read those transcripts, you must have been aware of the number of times that Facebook have said to this committee, let me write to you on that.
Yes.
And can I ask you, you've been here for almost exactly 90 minutes. How many times have you said, let me write to you on that?
You have to write to us afterwards to get the answer to that question.
Yeah. I think it's 3 or 4, actually. I don't think it's 100.
You take my point.
Yeah.
That we are desperately trying to get to the nub of this. And I can see there's a certain irony, as they're not in a global online giant like yourself resorting to writing to people constantly to try and get the answers. So let me ask you, what light do you think you have shone on the issues that we've raised today and previously that has provided this committee with greater clarity and more understanding than Mr Zuckerberg could have done?
So I think that's for you, actually, to
judge. No, I'm asking you.
I believe I've given you insights into the way that we think about regulation, the way that we think about election interference, decision-making around that.
I'm sorry to cut interrupt. I think we're going to have to move on at this point. Bob Zimmer.
Yes. Yeah, I would first of all like to thank Mr. Collins for really establishing this committee for this purpose. But my first question and my main concern with this whole study has been the foreign influence in election campaigns. And I guess deeply troubled by Facebook's response to that. Jim Balsillie said it when I asked him in our committee. I said, is our democracy at risk if we don't change the laws in Canada to deal with surveillance capitalism? Is our democracy at risk was the question. He said, without a doubt. What do you think?
So I think there are, again, we all work in the political sphere. What we want are free and fair elections. And what we don't want is people cheating, working around the rules. We all know political campaigns go up to the line, and we try and stop them going over the line. I think there are a number of vectors that are problematic. One is the foreign interference. One is that now people can, as we discussed in the context of Ireland, project their views into a country more easily than before. We need to acknowledge that and do something about it. The other aspect is the domestic side of things. And again, we talked about mainstream network earlier, and part of the point of our transparency tools is to try and stop the people who are perhaps most motivated, which are people inside your country, trying to do dirty tricks campaigns. Mm-hmm. So those are the two areas that I think we need to focus on, and we're trying to contribute our piece with the technology that gives you the transparency to spot both of those forms of inappropriate activity.
Do you feel that
is there not also a threat to politics when the trust of people is lost, where their data is used in an underhand way?
I think part was Ryan's question. Let Bob continue. But,
yeah. Sorry.
Sorry.
I think
did you want to
answer it first?
To answer that? Yes, and again, I think the work that's been done in the United Kingdom is long overdue. I worked in political campaigns. I'll be honest, I think there is a sort of carelessness and a bit of, well, if you win, it's okay attitude in political campaigning that I've seen and experienced.
I mean, in social media companies, it's used in an underhand way.
I think. Sorry.
Okay.
I don't think Bob was happy for Lord Allen to finish the question, but I don't think he'd ceded his time. But
yeah, I'll keep going. I don't have my gavel here from Canada, so. I'm not confident, especially from previous statements by Mr. Zuckerberg, and I'll read something that he said a few years ago, because he seems to deflect and really say, well, look, it's not that big a deal that we're involved in, or our platforms being used in election campaigns, and this is exactly what he said. Personally, I think the idea that fake news on Facebook, which is a very small amount of content, influence the election in any way, I think is a pretty crazy idea. Do you agree with Mr. Zuckerberg?
And again, he said that was not the right way to frame the discussion, but to pull out...
That's what he said, so I'm asking your response. Do you agree with Mr. Zuckerberg in his statement?
I'm saying it could be more elegantly classified, more elegantly said, but the point is, if you have domestic organizations and political parties spending this much, and you have evidence of some inappropriate activity that's spending this much, if you're looking for why the election went one way or the other, we should start with the big expenditure. Doesn't mean the small expenditure is not a problem. Doesn't mean we shouldn't look at it, but we shouldn't also not lose perspective if we're trying to understand why an election went one way or another. And that was not elegantly said, but
I'm actually not sure what you just said. Actually, in what you're
I'm saying in an election campaign, there is a huge amount of legitimate activity carried out by all the parties, right, depending on the country, spending millions potentially on ads online, potentially spending millions on TV, huge amount of activity. And we did spot this activity that was wrong, shouldn't have happened. There was political activity directed from Russia. If you say to me, was the election won because of this massive activity here or because of this small amount of activity over here, I think it's reasonable to say, let's start by looking at, if we think there's a problem, campaign again, spending generally.
Mr. Allen, I think that's the problem is you're again deflecting. And we saw by the New York Times that it's been referred to by another member on this committee, just about the delay, deny, and deflect. This seems to be more of the same from what you're saying today. No,
I'm acknowledging they're both problems. You asked me, I think, why that statement was made, why my CEO made that statement. I'm trying to describe to you the thinking, I think, that went behind it. And that's not meant to divert attention from the fact that all of these are problems that all need to be addressed.
I guess what I'm hoping, I put it down as the apology to, or 2.0, it was 2.0 I had, but it's really 0.20. Because here we are again hearing another apology from Facebook. Look, trust us, regulate us, etc. But we really don't have that much influence in the global scheme of things. in this room, we represent over 400 million people. And to not have your CEO sit in that chair there is an offense to all of us in this room, and really our citizens as well. I have another statement that, again, is a quote from this delay, deny, and deflect. And I'll quote the paragraph. But as evidence accumulated that Facebook's power could be exploited to disrupt elections, broadcast viral propaganda, and inspire deadly campaigns of hate around the globe, Mr. Zuckerberg and Ms. Sandberg stumbled. Bent on growth, the pair ignored warning signs, then sought to conceal them from public view. Deeply troubling, I would say. At critical moments over the last 3 years, they were distracted from personal projects and passed off security and policy decisions to subordinates. And again, I would say that you're a subordinate here before us today, according to the current and former executives. Do you agree with that paragraph?
No, I don't agree with that characterization at all. The people I work with and I know are very focused on trying to do the right thing. They are, again, I don't want to hide the fact we are trying to grow and develop our business. That's not something we shy away from. But I've been involved in numerous discussions where issues of significant importance have come up. They've been debated fully and thoroughly, and where we have taken action. Again, some of those actions have taken time to filter through, but perhaps the most significant that I've seen is when I started in the company, we were a company of a few hundred people. It was very difficult for us to get across a lot of the issues around safety and content. I'm now in a company where we have 30,000 people working on safety.
What was the quarterly profits from 2018? Can you state what those are for the room?
I would need to give you that number. I don't have it to hand.
It's around $13 billion.
Thank you.
So we had a previous conversation at this committee meeting, and I think somebody referred to it as a high school platform, but I referred to it as making grown-up dollars. And I guess I would challenge you. You seem to want to deflect. Just give me a second. You seem to deflect. And at the same time, you're collecting billions of dollars.
Yeah.
400 million people in this room, and yet an empty chair for Mr. Zuckerberg. What do you say to the 400 million constituents that we represent that you're taking that seriously?
I'd say we're making the investments. Again, look at it, and I'm sure you follow our stock prices avidly as we do, and one of the reasons that it's where it is.
Mr. Allen, you just told me that you really, we really don't have that much. There's other bigger issues involving election campaigns and what wins and causes them to be won and lost. You're still downplaying the role Facebook has in this situation. 23 million users in Canada, 36 million people that live and reside in Canada. That's a huge player on the global scheme. Just multiply that around the globe of 2 billion users. And you still don't seem to get a grasp on how much effect and influence you have on election campaigns.
I actually don't accept that characterization. Again, just to be clear, we have told our investors, we've told the market that we are making significant investments in infrastructure and people. We now have, I think, 30,000 people working on safety and security.
We just saw 115 pages in the midterm elections in the U.S. that you still had to pull down. My question is how long did they have an influence on that election? Right? It was pulled down 2 days before the election actually happened. There was 2 media reports of Cambridge Analytica. This is the group that's supposed to be banned from Facebook. Still ran ads under that banner for 2 weeks, and it wasn't caught by the $13 billion quarterly company that's Facebook. How do you answer those questions without just another apology?
No, we're making those investments, but I think, again, this goes to the heart of the problem. We now have, I think, a world-leading security team who are finding and catching those people and taking them down. And if we tell you about it, you say, well, how did they get on there? Well, they get on there because they are cunning and clever, and we need to stay ahead of them. I think we are in a much better place today, sitting here in front of you, than we were 2 years ago. You will have an election in Canada next year. There will be problems. There will be people who cheat and work around the system, but we will catch most of them. And our goal is, I think, shared with you, is that the Canadian election should not be seen to have been unduly influenced by online activity through our platform. We share absolutely that goal. We are making the investments. We can't guarantee that there will not be instances where there are people who cheat that we catch and have to take down during the campaign. And we'd love to work with you and the authorities in your countries on getting better at identifying those people and taking them down.
Thank you.
Soon Zule.
Mr. Allen, I'm here today together with another 2 of my parliamentary colleagues from Singapore. Singapore is a small country with 5 million people, but we have a highly digitally connected population. and online falsehoods can swiftly destabilize a small country like Singapore, affecting different aspects of our country, our national security, racial harmony, democratic processes, social cohesion, and trust in our public institutions. And so we have found it necessary to travel half the world here today to make sure that our voices are heard, that Facebook, a tech giant, will start taking responsibility for online disinformation. Now, for my first question, how is Facebook policing the setting up of fake accounts, the shutting down of these fake accounts and their networks?
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you making the long journey here to have this discussion. Hope that it's useful. The shutting down of fake accounts is an ongoing battle that we have. There are people, and again, just to be clear, most fake account creation, as we understand it, is not with political intent, it's with commercial intent. And so you'll have seen that these are people who want to create fake accounts to sell them. They sell followers, they are trying to create networks that they can use for the purposes of pushing out spam messages to people. We've explained that there will be, over a 3-month period, hundreds of millions of such accounts that we take down. Most of them are taken down within minutes of account creation. So the best way I found to describe this is it's a bit like a robot war, that there are people who've created programs on computers that create fake accounts, not just on Facebook, but other networks, millions of them. You know, they're blasting away, and we have artificial intelligence systems that try and understand what a fake account looks like and shut them down as soon as they come up. Yeah, so that is taking place. That's the mass of fake accounts. Then there are, I think perhaps more relevant to the political question, more insidiously, there are people who are very careful, create 1 or 2 accounts, and they act as though they're a normal Facebook user. And the issue that we saw in the United States with this Internet Research Agency was often accounts like that, where it wasn't this mass creation. They'd very carefully curated somebody so they look real, even though they weren't real.
But given that Facebook looked into the issue of Russian interference about 6 months or a year after the event, and even as recently as August, October of this year, is still removing fake accounts linked to Russia, would you agree that Facebook's playing of catch-up to stem online falsehoods is reactive and perhaps insufficient?
I mean, we're trying to get better all the time. And again, I would point to some research that we shared with the committee that shows that low quality information has decreased by 50% across the Facebook platform due to a number of measures we've taken. Those are independent studies by academics and by Les Décodeurs, which is the fact-checking arm of Le Monde in France. So these are not our studies, but people have looked at it and they've seen a significant decrease. So the battle's not over, but we do believe we started to make inroads. I do want to come back to this specific question of somebody who very carefully curates a fake account. Those are perhaps the hardest things to do. They can use technology. They use what they call a VPN to appear as though they're coming from a different country. Mm-hmm. They will get hold of photos that look very legitimate. That stuff is hard, and that's frankly where we need a lot of cooperation often with law enforcement agencies, so we can understand what's going on and try and deal with those people.
Yeah. So given the evolving modus operandi of its adversaries, and I think Mark Zuckerberg had called it well-funded, sophisticated, you used the words cunning and clever just earlier. Would you agree that it is possible that future elections can likewise be interfered with by methods that Facebook will only be able to discover after the fact?
As I replied to Mr. Zimmer, I think it is the case that we will continue to discover groups of people who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing at election time. Our job is to minimize that as far as we can. But I think it's unrealistic, as long as we have an internet, to think that there will, nowhere be any kind of attempt to interfere, because the technology does give people very strong tools to use against
So how is Facebook prioritizing credible content and deprioritizing falsehood when it continues to push content that readers want to see? Yeah. And you're potentially creating online echo chambers and amplifying falsehoods?
So there are various things we're doing, and I could try and explain briefly because I know we have limited time. But one of the major changes that we made was something called meaningful social interactions. That was to prioritize content that comes typically from your family and friends. And that kind of content tends to be less controversial than some of the content that's coming from some of these other sources.
But that could potentially create online echo chambers, right? Because people are sharing information that they want to see amongst a group of people that they are close to, self-selected individuals.
And again, within that variety, actually, there is some good research that shows if you have a reasonably broad family and friend group, you actually get a more diverse content from a group of family and friends. That's certainly my experience on Facebook, than you would if you were simply, going to the same restaurants and bars where you normally go and only deal with one group of people. So that's one piece. A major thing we've done is try and deal with what they call ad farms. Again, really important that a lot of the fake news, they just want you to click on it, and then you land on a page that has 20 ads, and the person gets 0.1 of a cent for you landing on that page. We're now trying to follow link through and understand if that's the landing page, and if it is, we're trying to prevent those links being shared.
Okay, I want to go back to a point. Just the last series of questions. Would you agree that more will be achieved if Facebook works with the relevant authorities to take down false information online and shuts down accounts?
Absolutely, and I know you're looking at a piece of legislation at the moment. One of the questions that's raised with us is why don't we just decide to take down false content? This is where I want to be clear. We do think it's important that there is a judicial process, some kind of process in place. I know France has just passed a law. Similarly, if someone claims that a politician is corrupt and that's false and we don't take it down, that's a problem. If it's true and we do take it down, that's equally a problem because we've stopped somebody shedding light on a genuine harm. The best person to make a decision about whether that claim is true or false is not Facebook or a Facebook employee. It is the relevant judicial authority in any country.
But would you agree that Facebook needs to take into account the potential ramifications that online falsehoods can have on society? And that if the falsehoods are allowed to pervade and this slow drip of poison can lead to huge ramifications in society, you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if the content is linked to real-world harm, our policies mean that we'll remove it today. I think that the harder area, which I know you're discussing, the French and discussing and others are discussing, is where the content is not obviously linked to real-world harm, when we would take it down, but it is a claim that people feel is disruptive, disturbing, is characterizing an election.
I would just like to end off with this question. Will Facebook be then open to adopting a regulatory approach and working with governments to develop solutions and undertaking voluntary reporting and independent audits?
So yes, we're keen to see a properly regulated structure. Again, there's detail in there. It doesn't mean turning up and saying this is exactly what we want will necessarily agree to everything, and that's again part of what we're trying to do in the process working with the French government is to understand how we can work together with regulators. But
we have to move on there. Edwin Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Allen.
Good afternoon.
Would you accept that there's no place for any content on Facebook which tags people on lines of race, religion, or ethnicity?
Sorry, I'm being distracted by something coming here. Please, could you repeat it?
I've just extracted some material so that we can move along more quickly. I'll just repeat the question.
Yes.
Would you accept that there's no place for any content on Facebook which attacks people on lines of race, religion, or ethnicity?
Yes, and our policies are very clear that that's not acceptable.
Yes, and in fact, your policy is very clear that when such attacks are made, that you're committed to removing it anytime you become aware of it. Would that be right?
Yes.
And if you just go to page 1 of that extract, you'll see Mr. Zuckerberg's Facebook extract from August 2017. And I'll read you the portions which I've highlighted. He says, when someone tries to silence others or attacks them based on who they are or what they believe, that hurts us all and is unacceptable. There is no place for hate in our community. That's why we've always taken down any post that promotes or celebrates hate crimes or acts of terrorism. Would that be correct?
Yes.
And you do so because you are aware that such content has the potential to divide communities, incite violence, tension, hatred, and strife. Would you agree?
Yes.
Right. Would you go to the second page of that extract? And I think you'll be familiar with what has happened in Sri Lanka recently, March this year. The post that was put up originally is the parts that is in pink. It's in the Sinhalese language, the language of the native Sri Lankans. And the post translates to, and I quote, "Kill all Muslims, don't even let an infant of the dogs escape."
Yeah.
That would be properly characterized as hate speech?
Clearly in breach of our terms of service.
It's a clear breach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. And it was then put up at a time when there was significant tensions between the people in Sri Lanka and Muslims, causing damage to property, deaths even, riots, damage to mosques, and eventually it resulted in the Sri Lankan government declaring a state of emergency in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes.
And would you agree that in the context of that kind of tensions occurring in Sri Lanka, putting up such a post would invariably travel far, divide those tensions or stress those tensions even more, and divide the community?
Yes, that's high priority content for us to remove.
Yes. If you just look at the page, it was then pointed out by a user, one of your users on Facebook, and subsequently picked up by one Harin Fernando, who was the communications minister of Sri Lanka at that time. Why is it that Facebook has refused to take it down?
The comment should be down. If it's not down, it should be. What I'm seeing in this is there are two possible reasons why the content was not taken down at the time. One is that simple error on the part of the person who looked at it.
Let me just stop you there. You go over the page of that second document, and you will see the response by Facebook when you were asked to take it down. And it says, "Thank you for the report. You did the right thing. We've looked over the post. So it was no mistake, Mr. Allen." And it says, "It doesn't go against one of our specific community standards."
Yeah, that was a mistake, though. I just want to be clear that somebody has made a mistake in the review.
Mr. Allen, this is a very serious, egregious mistake. Would you agree?
I agree, yes.
It goes completely against your own policy.
That's right.
To take down immediately.
Yeah.
So would you accept that this case illustrates that Facebook cannot be trusted to make the right assessment on what can properly appear on its platform?
No, so we make mistakes. Our responsibility, serious mistakes. Our responsibility is to reduce the number of mistakes. I still think that we are best placed to actually do the content removals, and that's why we're investing very heavily now in artificial intelligence, where we would precisely create a dictionary of hate speech terms in every language. We're working through the languages. The best way to resolve this is a dictionary of hate speech terms in Sinhalese that gets surfaced to a Sinhalese-speaking reviewer who can make sure that we do the job properly.
Well, Mr. Allen, in this case, whilst one excuse might be that your users or your reviewers don't understand Sinhalese, I mean, you have the communications minister of Sri Lanka telling you that this is hate speech and to take it down. And you review it, your people review it, you said hundreds of thousands of people review it, but they don't seem to abide by the same philosophy as you have expressed in your own policies.
Yeah, and again, so we make mistakes. Our job is to reduce the number of mistakes. I completely accept, as we've discussed previously, that we should be accountable for our performance to you, your colleagues, to every parliament and government that sat around this table today. I would love to be able to explain as part of that process how we do what we do, the challenges of getting it right, the challenge of doing it at scale, not because I expect sympathy, but because I think it's important to understand if we're going to solve the problem, what it is we need to do to solve it. And I think that will be a combination of us getting better at our jobs, using better technology, and frankly the accountability and you and your colleagues standing over us and making sure that we do it correctly.
Well, in this case, the post only came to a halt when the Sri Lankan government blocked Facebook.
Yes.
And do we have to get to that kind of measure?
No, I mean, we would much prefer not to.
How would the government trust that Facebook will live up to its own promise?
Again, this is where I think the openness has to be there to the extent, and I hope you have a constructive relationship with my colleagues in Singapore who work on these issues. I want us to be in a position where we share with you the good and the bad about how we think we're doing, in full expectation that you will be pushing us always to be better.
Well, we look forward to that
right
because
process.
We look forward to that because what's happened, by way of example, in Sri Lanka, and there are several others as well, should not be allowed to happen ever.
No, and as an employee of Facebook, I'm ashamed that things like this happen, and they do, and they shouldn't.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm quite aghast that you refer to something as serious as that as a mistake, quite flippantly, waving your hands. I find that quite offensive, I have to say.
I didn't mean it to be flippant. It was a mistake, yeah.
Yes, it's a bit. I think it's a bit more than a mistake. But something you said earlier, you said that most fake accounts are commercial, not political.
That's right.
That might be correct, but political accounts that do this have had an influence on outcomes of elections, on destabilising democracies. Do commercial accounts have that effect?
Generally not. I mean, so again, just be clear how it works. People who are creating commercial fake accounts, the phrase is clickbait. They just want you to click something so they can make money. The classic scenario is Johnny Depp moved into your town or some celebrity, because people will click that. At certain times, politicians become very clickable. And obviously in the United States election, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton reached that status. And so the people who are trying to make money start using Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton headlines. Not in this case, I think, because they want to influence the election, but because they want to get the clicks. Now, the fact that that's political will have, I guess, some influence on the election, and that's what people are now studying. There is, again, not to diminish it, I'm just trying to explain that mechanism. There are another whole set of people who are actually pushing out false stories with a deliberate political agenda. Absolutely. They don't care about you clicking on the stuff, they just want to get it out there. And that, for me, is politically a more insidious problem, even if the first category may be greater by volume.
Well, it's not just a political problem, it's a destabilising of democracy's problem. So how does Facebook define political advertising? How do you define what is a political advert?
So we, at the moment, this is one of the areas where we would really welcome a discussion with policymakers who are crafting the laws on this. At the moment, the system we've implemented in the UK, it says if you are advocating for a party or a candidate, or you're talking about an issue that is in front of the legislature, we'll classify that as political. That's imperfect. We recognise that. It's our best guess.
So it doesn't have to be from a political party?
It doesn't have to be, in this case, from a political party.
So how do you monitor, in the case of the UK, where political advertising is very highly regulated? We don't have a system like the States. You're very well aware of our system. How do you monitor that kind of grey political advertising that's going on that is undoubtedly impacting our electoral processes in this country?
So the system that we're implementing right now, and again, we will learn as we go, where an advert mentions Jeremy Corbyn or Theresa May or something that looks like it's political, it will get sent to a human being who will review it, and they'll make a determination. And if they think it is political campaigning, then they will go back to the advertiser and say, you need to register as a political advertiser. So that's the system that we've got at the moment. Again, recognising it's not perfect, but it's our best
And how many
effort.
people have you got doing that?
We're going to have hundreds of people working on that. So so recently in the context of the US election, we had thousands. We don't know yet for the UK, is the honest answer, because we don't know how many ads are going to be surfaced. This is entirely new. We will have as many people as we need to review the ads that get surfaced to us.
So what percentage of Facebook's monies are being spent on dealing with this problem? And this problem, as I've said, is destabilising democracies. What percentage of your budgets are being used on this?
I can't give you a percentage, but I can tell you it's significant. There are.
Can you write to us and tell us that?
I can look. I'm not sure it will be a percentage. I can tell you the size of the teams, how many people we've got involved, and I will undertake to follow up on describing it. It is a very major effort that's taking place inside the company. There are.
But a percentage is not telling us any kind of sensitive commercial information. I'm not asking for you precisely to the last penny what you're spending on this. What I'm trying to get at is how serious as an organisation you are taking the issue.
I will follow up with information I hope persuades you we're taking it seriously.
And apart from having something referred to someone, what other checks and balances are you making as to where money is coming from that is funding the driving of this information, this advertising?
So we think the best way to do that, so again, to be clear, as Facebook, we will get the payment information of the person who pays us. We don't have visibility into where they eventually got the money from. We think the best way, if there are questions around this, and we know that this committee has been looking at it in the context of some of the UK campaigns, the best way to explore that is through authorities like the Electoral Commission. We have a very good working relationship with the Electoral Commission here. We've done similarly in countries like Brazil that had elections recently, in Mexico.
You there, if you're in the middle of an election period, whether it's a general election, a local election, a referendum in this country, there is a very small time frame where money can be spent, where money can be raised, and money has to be declared. Reporting something to the Electoral Commission or any other of these bodies does not fall into that window frame. So how are you checking where that money comes from?
I mean, again, what we're doing is checking that the advertiser is in the United Kingdom. So we will, if you, in fact, your political party will have to sign up. I've been through the flow. When you register and say you want to run political ads, we will check if your Facebook account is normally used from the United Kingdom. If it is, we'll give you temporary access to the system. We will then send you out a letter with a code. If you want to advertise politically, you need to put the code in. You also need to give us your driving license or your passport. So we've collected all that information, very significant barrier.
But to be fair, more big political parties are going to work within the rules. The people that we're concerned about are the foreign agents trying to influence our democracy, which has clearly been happening, and we want it to stop. So what checks and balances are you putting in place to ensure that you do as much as you can to stop that happening?
So the checks I've described apply to everyone who's trying to run a political ad. So if you are now a Russian agent who wants to run a pro or anti-Jeremy Corbyn ad, when you try and run the ad, we're going to make you go through that flow. If you've got fake identity documents and a fake account, it is possible, I can see, that you could get through that. But then we will also have significant information that could be used with the appropriate authorities to prosecute you.
Like
so we're
what?
making it much harder. Well, we'll have the identity information they provided, we'll have the payment information they provided, we'll have our own record of where, what we know about that account.
Okay.
If there is an investigation, it's going to be pretty unwise if you have hostile intent or malintent to go through our flow and present all that information.
Can I just go back finally to something that you said in answer to a question a little while ago about if somebody puts something online that says somebody's corrupt and it's not true. How would you, because it was unclear how you thought that should be dealt with, how would you deal with that? How would you get that taken down? Because reputationally, if that's not true, that's very damaging to somebody. How would your company deal with that?
So the model that we've looked at, so again, if it's a claim, a simple claim, and we're not able to establish the truth, then...
So if it's a claim that's absolutely provable, it's not true, if it was me, what would I do to come to you?
Again, you would come to us, and if you had documentation to prove it's not true, if you had a claim of defamation, then we may well restrict access to the content because we think you have a valid claim of defamation.
Go through the court process to get
not necessarily. The claim could be a claim that hasn't been in the court, but the system that we see as working very effectively is in Brazil under the Marco Civil. There they have courts, and I think at election time centres here, the courts sit 24/7. If somebody has an issue, the judge issues an order, the order comes to us. That makes it really simple.
But I'm not in Brazil, so what would I do?
So you would send us a solicitor's letter, and we would our legal team would look at the solicitor's letter, and if we think that you've got a colourable claim for defamation, we'd be likely to restrict the content on that basis. That's not ideal. We may get a counterclaim then from the other party. For us, I say the preferred system, and I expect law will sort of evolve over time in this direction. I think this is actually the thinking in Singapore, but with a minister involved. Our preferred system is that an authority in the country has looked at the case and has issued a direction. We can follow the direction, and if the person whose content it is wishes to challenge it, they challenge it back to that authority. We don't want to be in the middle of, he said, she said.
You don't think you've got a responsibility?
Well, we have a responsibility once it's illegal, but I actually don't think it's very democratic, frankly, that we as a private company are deciding he said, she said between two people. That should be a court that decides that. That's the tradition around defamation, and I think it should continue.
Thank you.
At that point, Nelly Leenan.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do you know the expression "sending your cat"? Sending your cat.
No.
Well, I am from the Flemish part of Belgium, and in my language it means not showing up.
Yeah.
So we can state, dear colleagues, that Mark Zuckerberg sent his cat to us today, to Canada, to Singapore, to France, to Belgium, to the United Kingdom. He sent his cat. Earlier we stated that Facebook would like to stop being in the confrontational modus.
Yeah.
Do you think that sending his cat or not showing up today helps him getting out of the confrontational modus?
So I think engaging in the debate gets us out of the confrontational mode. I hope I'm able to assist as a cat.
No, you are sitting next to the cat.
He's...
Yes, he sent his cat.
Thank you.
But I represent more than 6 million Facebook users in Belgium. That's more than half of the population. Facebook was convicted in Belgium because it was following the activities of Facebook users on other websites without their consent. So basically it is monitoring our activities on the web without our knowing. This is a clear invasion on our privacy and also on GDPR. Are you still doing it?
So again, I'm very familiar with that case, which is a long-running one, and this concerns this question of whether, when there is what's called a social plugin, whether a piece of Facebook is on a third-party website, the extent to which that data can be returned to Facebook. We believe that that is a legal activity. It is governed actually now by the GDPR, and I think that's accepted actually including by the Belgian Data Protection Authority. I'm sure it will be returned to. And it has much wider implications. Again, it's not just a Facebook thing. Many websites now around the world fund their free content through advertising. The advertising providers, not just Facebook, but all of them, use these cookies in order to create their business model. It may be that the European Union, through GDPR and the e-privacy directive, decides to limit that. And if they do, we will follow the law. But it will have profound implications. I don't want to hide that. You know, Belgian publishers, like everyone else, depend on this advertising ecosystem. That will have a profound implication, and that's why we think it's worth testing in a lot of detail.
Mm-hmm. I also represent millions of non-Facebook users. And I think it was my colleague of France earlier today who asked you some questions about what you do with non-users' data. And you stated, and let me see if I heard it clear, that the non-user data is still sitting on Facebook servers.
For a period of time, again, just to be clear,
Yes.
The two categories, if I upload my contacts to Facebook that I have on my device, they will sit associated with my account for me to make friends with my contacts. There are also log files. The log files are technical files that any provider gets that say this IP address and this browser reached one of the properties that had Facebook content on it. And those log files are deleted periodically. So there is a routine where those log files are removed. But people would argue that is us holding non-user data because
Yes.
it has an IP address.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would argue that too.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not GDPR consent, and that I must ask you if you can ensure that Facebook is not doing this in Belgium or in Europe, or are you doing it all over the world? So is it specific domestic, or
Yeah.
are you just doing it all over the world? Because we have that GDPR legislation.
That's right. So our systems are, we believe, compliant with GDPR generally. As I explained, I think there are some interesting questions that are yet to be tested because the GDPR is new. We'll understand, fully what it means, what consent means, what all of these questions mean over the next 2 or 3 years. I'm confident that a number of the test cases will be around Facebook, but it's also important to note that the technologies we use are pretty industry standard. And so, again, if GDPR and the e-privacy directive, the other important piece of European legislation, find that certain practices are illegal, they'll be illegal for us and everyone else. But at this stage, we believe everything we're doing is compliant.
Well, I have another question. Does Facebook have two faces? Because on the one hand, Facebook, there's Facebook that prints large advertisements in the newspapers to tell us how they have changed. But on the other hand, a Facebook that hires shady PR firms to smear competitors and critics, as we have learned from the reporting in the New York Times.
And again, I discussed earlier, I think the reporting was deliberately selective in terms of picking information that will be damaging to us. That's fine. People are perfectly entitled to do that. But the specific piece about that firm that was hired, our CEO has gone on record and said that's not the way that he expects us to work. And a senior executive has admitted, again, in public, that he was responsible, and we intend to make sure that doesn't happen in the same way again.
Then I have more general questions. Facebook is telling us that it is taking new measures to provide users with tools and to combat fake news on its platforms. However, it's unclear how we will know if these efforts will be effective. How will Facebook provide transparency on the use of these measures and the technology and algorithms that are behind these tools?
So this is one of the important areas we're working on that I think has come out of the helpful attention on the fake news subject from this committee, from other parliaments, that there is a big push around academic study in this area. I think that's helpful. There are some studies that are already being done independently. I quoted a couple earlier. I think it was University of Michigan and Les Décodeurs in France. There are also academics who want to be able to work with us, and we have a program to work with them. There are questions there. Again, back to the other theme of this debate, which is privacy and access, third-party access to data. We need to make sure that in wanting to work with academics to understand fake news, we don't end up sharing data in ways that people would find inappropriate. And so that's the challenge. It's one we're working on with the academics themselves. And again, just as a reminder, Dr. Kogan was an academic at the time that his application collected the data. So we can't just say, if you're an academic, it's okay. You can't have a free pass, but we need to work out some protocol where we can work with reputable academics to understand the problem better.
Okay, I'm very sorry. I think we might have to move on at that point because there are a few other members that come in. We don't have very much time left. Pritin Singh.
Hi. Beg your pardon, good afternoon. As a matter of public interest and policy today, and speaking today specifically, how has Facebook heightened vigilance and monitoring of anonymous users, especially new sign-ups and posts on your platforms in the run-up to elections and during elections post-nomination?
And again, just a bit sort of level set on Facebook, our expectation remains for the Facebook service that anybody who signs up does that using their real name, their real identity, and that's core to our service. Other services operate differently, and that's fine. We're not criticizing them, but just the nature of Facebook is it's intended for you to connect with your real family and friends. And if you're sharing photos of your kids, you want to know who that person is. So we maintain very strongly that policy. There should not be, therefore, anonymous users, and if people are reported to us, and it looks like the account is not real, we will put them in what we technically call a checkpoint. The next time they try and log on, it'll say, hey, we need some more information for you to prove your identity. So that's the design philosophy we have, which is nobody should be on there anonymously, whether for political purposes or otherwise, and we build systems to try and detect and prevent that.
Are there any other initiatives that Facebook is following up with currently, in light of what has been happening and the conversations that are happening in legislatures around the world about fake news, as to how Facebook can deal with the prospects of elections being, to put it mildly, tampered with?
So one of the things that we've implemented, and you may have seen some press coverage on the US version of this at the midterms, this notion of a war room around elections. But the best way to describe it, I think, is there's a task force that we now create for every significant election that comes up. That task force consists of security specialists, policy specialists, legal specialists, operational specialists. Their job is to understand the specific risks of that election, working with outside bodies, often in the country, and then deploying whatever tools and technology we need to deal with those risks. So that's really the sort of strongest signal I can give you. And back to the question earlier about intent, that we have intent, and those task forces have the resources, whatever resources they need to do the job, are made available to them.
You said significant elections. Would that also mean that countries which have a small signature, small footprint vis-a-vis Facebook's 2.2 billion users, they would also fall squarely under these this war room concept that you spoke of?
So we're building it out, and again, I want to, in an ideal world, it's every election, everywhere, all of the time. Our current resourcing, I think, allows us to look at all national elections. So if there's a national election in Singapore, for example, that would be covered. The area we're now looking at is, well, when you've got a significant regional election in a country, can we also cover that? So we're building it up. At the moment, I'm very confident, and I look at the future schedule of elections, I'm very confident any national election we would reach. Latvia, I know, are here, and we had a similar task force around the Latvian election. So we are looking at every election, whether the country is big or small, at a national level. And then the question is, can we extend that also into regional and local?
Well, let me just end off with a final question in the interest of time. Would Facebook consider working actively with local election authorities and even political party representatives to remove or flag posts that would compromise the political process and, by extension, a voter's choice?
I mean, not only be willing, but we think that's essential. And again, I want to repeat it, I haven't said enough, that the people who decide if an election is free and fair are you. And your authorities and the political parties. And so we want to do whatever is necessary in order for everyone to have the confidence that the election was free and fair. And we can't do that on our own. We can make tools, we can work with you, but ultimately we need to engage with you in order to meet that shared objective, that we contributed positively rather than negatively to the election in your country. So it's essential.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leopoldo Moreau.
Gracias, presidente. Yo voy a formular preguntas y comentarios en castellano como una manera de corroborar la afectación que se produce a la democracia global como consecuencia de este tipo de prácticas y tropelías que se han cometido.
He's going to formulate the questions in Spanish, and I'm going to translate them. He wants to speak in Spanish because he wants to know that these practices, these problems are being suffered everywhere in the world. So.
Ya está bien que entiendo castellano.
Muy bien.
Estamos.
En primer lugar, quiero decir que en mi país, cuando se conoció el caso y el escándalo de Cambridge Analytica, además hubo una denuncia de la filial de Amnesty International respecto a campañas que se habían llevado adelante con la misma forma y la misma práctica a través de Facebook contra periodistas independientes. Esto significó que la Comisión de Libertad de Expresión que yo presido citara a representantes de Facebook y de otras redes sociales a los efectos que dieran explicación sobre este tema. Y si bien es cierto hoy yo comparto la frustración de todos nosotros por la ausencia del señor Zuckerberg, quiero decir que de alguna manera estamos contentos porque nosotros en Argentina no logramos que Facebook se presentara, ni siquiera tuvimos el hombre invisible en la comisión.
Do you want me to?
For the committee.
So, in Argentina, we had a report from Amnesty International that suggested that there were large account farms of with fake identities, and the commission that Leopoldo presided called upon Facebook representatives, and since he regrets that Zuckerberg is not here today, but he wants to know that he feels lucky because in Argentina no one from Facebook showed up for the commission.
Por eso queremos aprovechar la oportunidad para saber con quién debemos comunicarnos de Facebook en Argentina, porque nos informaron que no tienen representación.
So we like to, did you get it?
Yes, yes. So the question was our representation in Argentina. So first, I can only apologize. We do have a significant office in Argentina, and I will...
Sorry, you had an office in Argentina, but they wouldn't give any answer. And they said that there was a representative from Latin America that was supposed to answer and show up, but we didn't have any answer.
So I will take this now and find out what happened and make sure we have answers to you.
Yeah.
So yes. That's all I can
Dice que
offer.
no va a
Sí.
solucionar el problema.
Bueno, muy bien. Quisiera preguntarle qué políticas están pensando implementar para evitar la proliferación de noticias falsas a través de WhatsApp. Hace poco tiempo atrás, pocas semanas, en el país amigo de Brasil, hubo elecciones y hay reportes de que se han utilizado esas redes, concretamente las redes de WhatsApp, para difundir noticias falsas. Esas redes representan un problema porque es difícil detectar el origen de esas noticias y el impacto que tiene sobre las redes. Quiero decirle que en mi país nos estamos aproximando también a elecciones y hay grupos de inescrupulosos o empresas fantasmas que se están acercando a los partidos políticos para ofrecer el mismo servicio, es decir, la difusión de noticias falsas a través de WhatsApp. Quisiera saber quisiera saber qué tipo de medidas se están tomando en relación a esto, sobre todo en la utilización de los grupos de WhatsApp.
Sí.
So what policies are you planning to implement to prevent fake news proliferation through WhatsApp platform, as it had been widely reported? It happened in Brazilian elections at a massive scale this year, especially since there's no way to trace the origin or impact of such content in the platform. In Argentina, some groups are already starting to offer this service, not directly from Facebook or WhatsApp, but as intermediate. So the question is, what are you going to do with that?
So to be very clear, so again, for those who don't use the technology, messaging services like WhatsApp is not unique, but messaging services do create a different set of questions, I think, for political communication from advertising. But to be clear on WhatsApp's rules, WhatsApp is intended as a person-to-person messaging service. Yes, you can create groups as well that are useful, but it should not be used for spamming people.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I know it was born as a chat platform. Today you have APIs. You know, there's business APIs.
Exactly.
You can use it for massive messaging.
Yes.
There are enterprises that are doing it. Business legitimately.
Exactly.
It's been said that in Brazil, those APIs were used for campaigns. So maybe the problem is that it's not being used in politics as a hand-to-hand or as a one-to-one communication tool.
So you're ahead of me, so I wanted to explain that where people are buying illegally lists of WhatsApp numbers and where there are, and the member referred to like shadowy companies. If shadowy companies are promising to circulate information across WhatsApp where they've collected lists of numbers, that is against our terms. That should stop. We are implementing proper business connections, and with a proper business connection, that will be regulated by us, as in you would have to be behaving appropriately, legally, etc. in order to do that. So I want to be clear that the immediate solution here, and I know Brazil it was an issue, is if people are aware of shady companies promising to do illegal WhatsApp marketing against our terms, tell us, and we will take action against them. That shouldn't be happening.
But if it's easy to stop it, how come you didn't stop it in Brazil? And also, how are you going to stop it when it comes to open groups?
So we may get on the Brazilian question, but we did, where we were made aware of it, we did take action. We're conscious now, and you raising the question is very helpful, that it's an area we need to give more priority to. I'm just in the process, actually, we're building WhatsApp into those election task forces I talked about. So we recognise that WhatsApp also, conversations around WhatsApp and the way that's used, and other messaging services, again, just to be clear, needs to be part of the whole election protection effort.
He says that if you're working on it, if you can hurry up because elections are coming real soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We will
move on to the next one. It sets up Alessandro Malone perfectly.
Thank you, Chair Nicolas, for the kind invitation and for the honor of representing Brazil here. As other nations, we have recently felt the hindering impact of disinformation and fake news in our electoral process. It has become a serious threat to modern democracy, maybe the biggest, boosted by the internet. When the press emerged, she did it without any rules, which later had to be created. Radio and television too, with each country devising its own set of legislations. The internet also needs regulation so that it can protect institutions and, through them, fundamental rights. In Brazil, we approved the Marco Civil da Internet, our Internet Bill of Rights. After all, the same democracy that allowed social media to flourish should now be protected by social media. There is, however, a unique challenge. The internet doesn't respect borders, which poses a challenge to national legislation. So there are two possible paths to be followed. Countries either establish an authoritarian control over what is shared on the internet, which is a bad way, or they advance towards the creation of a set of rules common to all countries. We all choose the second path, and this is and that's what we begin to do here today with Chair Damien Collins. Internet companies and social media companies need to work in partnership with governments in search for solutions that preserve our democracies and people's rights around the globe. But we still can't see that happening, unfortunately. Therefore, my first question to Mr. Allen is, what is Facebook doing in order to avoid the improper use and manipulation of its algorithms to influence illegally elections?
Yeah. So there are two major changes. One is a set of changes we've made around the way in which the algorithm searches information generally, which, as I say, the independent studies I think have shown have dramatically reduced the amount of information classed as low quality. So I think that is broadly helpful, but specifically helpful in the context of politics. The other thing is, I'll point you to the recent announcement by my friend the Cat here, who published a post on our approach to content on the platform. And in Mark's post, he described how we have recognized that there is a category of borderline content that, so it's not banned under our rules, it's close to being banned. That may be getting excessive distribution. It may be getting rewarded by the algorithm because it's sensational. And rather than rewarding it, we should reduce it. And so he's committed, again, to a path to work on that. I think that will have a significant positive impact. Final element where we have been working hard is working with fact checkers, third parties, again, not Facebook deciding on the truth of statements, but third parties doing that. Not everybody's happy with that. There are different views about which fact checkers we should or shouldn't use. But that's the other mechanism we've been testing that we think could be helpful, where if a piece of content is marked as false, that may reduce its distribution. So all of these things are about trying to shift the balance between higher quality, less sensational content and lower quality, more sensational content in the algorithm.
Second, during Brazilian most recent elections, only 6 days before the voting day, 68 pages and 43 profiles were deleted from Facebook all at once for violating spam and authenticity policies. Together, they formed the most influent network supporting one of the presidential candidates, causing a huge impact on social interaction. In 1 month, these pages and profiles reached over 12 million interactions. However, they were only removed after a newspaper brought this case to light. Why didn't Facebook act before or bring this to the attention of the Brazilian judiciary, regardless of the candidate?
So this scenario, and again, it's not unique. There were similar situations in the midterms as well. These scenarios are some of the hardest ones for us to deal with, and again, where I think we need additional regulatory guidance. The kind of activity that we see is people organizing together through Facebook. In this case, often using authentic accounts, so they're not fakes, but they've organized together to promote their content through our systems by pushing it out into multiple groups and on multiple pages. Now, that's gaming the system at one level, and if it results in the content being seen as spam, we may act against it. But there's another interpretation which says, hey, that's political campaigning. So understanding, where we draw the line between if your political party sends a message to 100,000 of your followers saying, please post this on Facebook, that kind of feels legitimate. If it's fake accounts doing it, it's definitely illegitimate. There's a lot of activity in this grey zone in between where it isn't obvious to us that it's a problem. Sometimes on investigation we find actually there was some kind of inappropriate coordination, or the people behind it were fakes, even though most of the people sharing the content were not. So again, we can talk about it in more detail, but this is one of the areas that I'm thinking about at the moment where I'm very sensitive to the fact that, as I say, legitimate campaigning and illegitimate activity can often look quite similar to each other when carried out through networks of party supporters.
Only two more questions. Over the years, the company has changed its algorithms several times to privilege what seemed the most interesting and profitable for the business. Recently, Facebook started to privilege engagement and interaction on the platform, as you stated here today, Mr. Allen. And this is also achieved by fake profiles, which are specially used for this purpose also during elections. To what extent is the maintenance of fake profiles interesting to the platform? How can we be sure Facebook has a deeper commitment towards democracy than towards its profit?
Yeah. So I want to be very clear on fake profiles. As I described earlier, that the whole premise of our service is uniquely, I think, on the internet. If I join Facebook, I make 100 contacts, I've got a high degree of confidence that those contacts are who they say they are. And I say there are other spaces that are more anonymous, but Facebook is not. It's a real identity space. We've estimated, and this is in our public filings, that between 3 and 4% of the accounts on Facebook at any one time are fake. We make strenuous efforts to try and remove that and reduce that number. We have no business interest. In fact, it's entirely contrary to our business interest if that number increases and people, as I say, think about what you're sharing on Facebook. It's your family, your friends, it's personal. If that number increases and people start worrying about who they're sharing with, that's completely contrary to our business interest.
Last question. In Brazil, as our friend of Argentina mentioned, we were especially impacted by WhatsApp in the most recent elections. Just 1 month ago, it was widely used to spread manipulated content and fake news in the elections. During the process, WhatsApp banned more than 100,000 accounts in Brazil. 100,000 accounts in Brazil. What is Facebook doing to prevent WhatsApp from becoming a mass dissemination center for fake news?
Yeah. So as I described it again, we are now building WhatsApp into our thinking about election integrity. Obviously particularly relevant for countries like Brazil, India, which is a very large WhatsApp using country, but more and more countries around the world. I do think we need a pretty open discussion actually with policymakers around this. There is something quite different, I think, between regulation that affects a public space, like most of Facebook. Sure. Facebook pages are public, we host the content, it's out there, and something that regulates people's private one-to-one communications or even small group communications. So I think there are some novel challenges that we need to look at there. But again, we do not want to see any of our services used for that kind of manipulative behavior. We don't think that's in the interests of the people who use the service or the service itself. This doesn't build trust. We want people to be able to communicate pretty freely and openly. We don't want our services to be manipulated by people inappropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ines Levina Egner.
Thank you. Being one of the latest, it's never easy, but I'm representing Parliament of Latvia, and you already mentioned the Latvian example. We really took our risks seriously, knowing that our eastern neighbor, Russia, will be interested in the elections, and also knowing the geopolitical situation. We are really building up a special setup within the Latvian institutions, NGOs, media, working and monitoring the content of Facebook. And so our cooperation with Facebook was actually very good. But what we did from our side in a pre-electional campaign within the elections, and on an everyday basis, of course, it's not possible to do. It's a lot of work, and we hope that the dialogue and cooperation would go also more on the Facebook side. So concluding everything you mentioned before, that you are working on an architecture regarding the political advertisement, working on investment and infrastructure and people. What does it actually mean, for example, for Latvia, for Latvian language? How would it affect our cooperation for the future, and when it will start to be more also on the Facebook side, not only on the government side?
Yeah. So there are two things I think we're doing that are designed deliberately to be helpful to countries like Latvia. One is that we've been deepening our partnership with external experts, in particular organizations like the Atlantic Council, who have threat monitoring centers. They have networks of people, including, I hope in your country, but there are sort of across all countries at risk. So part of it is that we partner with the people who, as their full-time job, monitor threats like the threats you're facing. And that intelligence goes back into our systems. There's obviously a focus on elections, but we'd like to extend that beyond election time to the rest of the time. The other thing that we're doing is obviously building up our own internal resources and understanding. And so we are extending our language capabilities, starting by making sure we have people to look at things specifically. But I think a lot of the hope over time is that we're able also to build in different languages into our artificial intelligence systems. They're the things that allow us to work at scale. So if, for example, there is a particularly damaging meme that's going out in the Latvian language, the best way for us to be able to spot that is going to be using technology that understands this language, these terms are a problem, and then surfaces that to somebody who can deal with it. So those are the areas which I hope are helpful, and I agree entirely that we need to move from this being an election issue to an all-year-round issue.
Thank you very much. I think we're sort of out of time. I had an indication from two members they want to ask one final question at the close. I could ask probably if that is limited to a single question. So could I call Catherine first, and then Charlie Angus.
In fact, you've mentioned France twice, arguing that you had a new cooperation with the French government about this question of the data. In fact, let's admit you had no choice if you wanted to restore your reputation and to restore trust and to reconquer public opinion, at least in our country, but in fact throughout the world. But that was before November the 14th, in fact, and before these new revelations, especially that the fact that Mark Zuckerberg and some senior executives knew and had been warned about what could happen, the Russians having interfered already on the social network. So how can we restore trust in those circumstances? You can make superficial promises, all right, but in fact the problem is deeper. I wanted to draw your attention on the economic model of the internet. Are you prepared to think about refunding your economic model? Because one knows already too well now that in fact fake news, of course, they are due to political strategies, and attempts at destabilizing some countries and intervening in political campaigns, but in fact fake news generate huge profits. This is it, one must admit, because and it leads you to harvest more and more data from more and more people in exchange of publicities and services. So there's a sort of vicious circle. Are you prepared, really, seriously, to work on refounding this model?
So on your first question on trust, again, I just want to clarify our expectations for the project we're working on with the French government. That will be to work with French regulators for us to share a lot more information about what we do in order to try and build trust. And at the end of it, they will tell you whether or not they agree that, you know, we're a trustworthy organization. So I just want to be clear that this is not sort of fake, this is real, that we will be sharing a lot of information with them, and they will share that with you and the rest of the world.
Now you're obliged to now. You have no choice.
You
have no choice. Yeah. If you want to restore your reputation.
Yeah, not going to disagree. So on the business model, again, the question is raised a lot. In an ideal world, people would give you money merely for the service. A system in which you have millions and millions of subscriptions coming in every month would be ideal. In reality, we found that the way in which most people want to consume internet services, they do accept a model where it's free at the points of use and they receive a certain amount of advertising. Now, our interest is in high quality content and high quality advertising. And if the advertising is junk or the content is junk, that's not sustainable. People are not going to stay with your service. So we don't think the advertising model is going to go away. We think that not just for our service, but generally across the internet, that's the bargain that people are comfortable with. Our job is to make sure that the content and the advertising is as high quality as possible.
Thank you. Final question, Charlie Angus.
Well, thank you, Chair. I want to thank all my colleagues in allowing me to start off and to wrap up. And I want to wrap up on a very hopeful note, because I was so pleased with our friends from Ireland to get you to say how much you believe in regulation. We all certainly agree. But what we're regulating, or what it seems to be with you and your friend Mr. Zuckerberg, are the symptoms. It's easy to say we'll deal with fake news and misinformation, but you are the arbiter right now of the news cycle around the world because of your video metrics. And what we learned in 2014, you became aware that they were highly inflated and did nothing. Now, you could say you're on a learning path and a journey and you might get back to us. I would consider that corporate fraud on a massive scale. If you are getting news organizations and you're selling them a model of video metrics that are false and over promoting it, that is a form of corporate fraud. And the problem we have with Facebook is there's never accountability. So I would put it to you when we talk about regulation, that perhaps the best regulation would be antitrust. Because people who don't like Facebook, well, they could go to WhatsApp. But we have problems in South America, we have problems in Africa, and we have to go back to Mr. Zuckerberg, who's not here. My daughters who get off Facebook, well, they go to Instagram. But that's now controlled by Facebook. That perhaps the simplest form of regulation would be to break Facebook up or treat it as a utility, so that we could all then feel that when we talk about regulation, we're talking about allowing competition, we're counting metrics that are actually honest and true, and that Facebook has broken so much trust. To allow you to simply gobble up every form of competition is probably not in the public interest. So when we're talking about regulation, would you be interested in asking your friend Mr. Zuckerberg if we should have a discussion about antitrust?
And I would respond that it depends on the problem we're trying to solve. If the challenge is around...
The problem is Facebook. That's the problem. And we're talking about symptoms, but the problem is the unprecedented economic control of every form of social discourse and communication, that it's Facebook, that is the problem that we need to address.
And I would just contend, unless you're going to turn off the internet, I am not confident that the people we serve, you serve, would be better off in a world where Facebook is not able, however imperfectly, to offer services where we spent 15 years learning how to do it. If we started all over again with a different set of services...
But we're not being Luddites here. We're just saying that we need some level of corporate accountability.
And
so I'm not
that.
saying we're turning the internet off. I'm saying that perhaps Facebook, in its unwillingness to actually be accountable to the international body and legislators around the world, that maybe antitrust would be something that would help us be able to make sure that we get credible democratic responses from a corporation.
And if I could just say the final word, I think also we would distinguish between the internet and Facebook and say they're not necessarily the same thing.
I agree.
Thank you very much, Lord Allen. Thank you for your evidence this morning. Committee's now breaking, and we'll sit again at 3:30 when we take evidence from the UK Information Commissioner. Thank you.
Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room.